In the heart of Burfield, Oklahoma, sits Gutierrez Auto Repair, a modest shop where 58-year-old janitor Robert Taylor quietly mops floors and empties trash cans, hiding a secret that would shock everyone who knows him. 5 years ago, Robert was one of the country's most respected automotive engineers, with advanced degrees and revolutionary engine patents. But today, he pushes a mop cart and keeps his mouth shut about what happened in between. This morning, a billionaire's prize, 1965 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud III, breaks down with an impossible engine problem that stumps 3 certified mechanics, 2 specialists, and 1 factory expert. The shop faces bankruptcy from a potential lawsuit. Robert Taylor will step forward and make the most shocking bet of his life, wagering his job and everything he has left that he can fix the unfixable in exactly 1 hour. What happens next will prove that heroes don't always carry briefcases. Sometimes they carry mop buckets, and that the most extraordinary people are often hiding in plain sight, waiting for just one moment to remind the world what real skill looks like. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first pale light of dawn crept through the grimy windows of Gutierrez's Auto Repair as Robert Taylor pushed through the side entrance. His weathered hands gripped a ring of keys that jingled softly in the morning silence. The shop smelled of motor oil, metal shavings, and the lingering ghost of yesterday's cigarette smoke from old Ralph's corner, where he held court with stories of engines past. Robert moved through the familiar darkness with the practiced ease of someone who had walked these same paths for 5 years. His work boots, making soft, scuffing sounds against the concrete floor, stained with decades of automotive fluids. He flipped the overhead lights, and fluorescent bulbs flickered to life with their characteristic buzzing hum, illuminating a workspace that told the story of honest labor. Tool chests lined the walls like metal soldiers, their drawers labeled in Manuel's careful handwriting. Hydraulic lifts stood ready for another day's work, their arms reaching skyward like mechanical prayers. Robert set down his lunch pail, a dented metal box that had belonged to his father, and surveyed the shop with eyes that saw far more than most people realized. The night shift had left their usual calling cards. A half-finished brake job on Mrs. Thompson's Ford Escort, tools scattered across a workbench like fallen leaves, and an oil pan sitting beneath a Chevy pickup that had been dripping the same steady rhythm for 3 days. Robert pulled his janitor's cart from the supply closet. Its wheels squeaked in protest, as they always did, despite his weekly attempts to oil them. The cart held the tools of his trade now: industrial mops, buckets, cleaning supplies, and trash bags. A far cry from the precision instruments he once wielded with surgical skill. As he began his morning routine, Robert's movements held a peculiar economy of motion that spoke of deeper understanding. When he wiped down the workbenches, his cloth moved in precise patterns that somehow managed to clean around expensive diagnostic equipment without disturbing carefully calibrated settings. When he swept beneath the cars on lifts, he instinctively ducked at exactly the right moments to avoid protruding exhaust pipes and suspension components. Most telling of all, when he emptied the waste oil containers, he handled each one with the reverence of someone who understood that every drop represented both environmental responsibility and the lifeblood of internal combustion engines. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm until the distant rumble of a powerful engine cut through the ambient sounds of a wakening Burfield. Robert paused in his mopping, his head tilted slightly as he listened to an approaching vehicle that sounded unlike anything typically seen in their working-class neighborhood. The engine note was smooth, refined, with the kind of deep, confident purr that could only come from hand-assembled British engineering and decades of meticulous maintenance. Through the large bay doors, a gleaming silver automobile appeared like something from another era. The 1965 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud III moved with stately grace, its chrome bumpers catching the morning sun and throwing dancing reflections across the shop's interior walls. The car's massive presence seemed to shrink the space around it, making the everyday pickup trucks and sedans look like toys by comparison. Every curve and line spoke of an age when automotive craftsmanship was measured not in units per hour, but in months of patient hand-fitting and adjustment. The Rolls-Royce came to a stop with the softest whisper of its air brakes, and for a moment, silence returned to the shop. Then the driver's door opened with the satisfying thunk that only comes from doors fitted with Swiss precision, and a man in his early 60s emerged. Arthur Worthington carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to check his bank balance. His tailored suit was worth more than most of the cars in the shop. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his handmade shoes clicked against the concrete with the crisp authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "I need someone to look at my car immediately," Worthington announced to the shop, his voice carrying the expectation of instant compliance. "The engine developed a hesitation this morning, and I have a very important meeting in Oklahoma City this afternoon." Robert continued mopping in the background, but his eyes never left the Rolls-Royce. Something in the car's stance, a subtle settling on its suspension, a barely perceptible tremor in its idle, told him more than Worthington's words ever could. This wasn't a simple hesitation. This was the beginning of something much more serious. The kind of problem that separated real mechanics from parts replacers. Lucia Gutierrez emerged from her office, wiping her hands on a shop rag and trying to hide her surprise at seeing such an expensive automobile in her modest establishment. At 45, Lucia had inherited both the shop and its reputation for honest work from her father, but she'd never had to deal with a customer whose car cost more than her annual revenue. "Good morning, sir," she said, extending a slightly oil-stained hand that Worthington pointedly ignored. "I'm Lucia Gutierrez, the owner. What seems to be the problem with your vehicle?" "The problem?" Worthington replied with barely concealed impatience, "is that I don't have time for problems. This car has been maintained by specialists at authorized dealerships its entire life. It shouldn't have problems. Yet this morning, it began hesitating during acceleration, and now there's an unusual sound from the engine bay." As if summoned by the conversation, Manuel Santos appeared from beneath a Honda Civic, where he'd been replacing a transmission, his coveralls stained with the honest evidence of hard work. At 38, Manuel was the shop's head mechanic, certified in multiple specialties and proud of his ability to diagnose problems that stumped other shops. He approached the Rolls-Royce with the confidence of someone who'd never met an engine he couldn't figure out. "Let me take a listen," Manuel said, already reaching for the hood release. "These old British cars, they've got their quirks, but they're not that different from anything else under the hood." The massive hood lifted with hydraulic assistance, revealing an engine bay that looked more like a piece of industrial art than automotive machinery. Every component was finished to jewelry-like perfection, from the polished valve covers to the chrome-plated air cleaner assembly. The engine itself was a masterpiece of mid-1960s engineering, a 6.2-liter V8 that had been hand-assembled by craftsmen who took personal pride in every bolt they tightened. Manuel leaned over the engine, listening to its idle with the practiced ear of someone who diagnosed thousands of automotive ailments. But after several minutes of careful attention, his confident expression began to show traces of uncertainty. The engine's rhythm was subtly wrong, but in a way that defied easy categorization. "Jimmy," Manuel called to the young apprentice, who'd just arrived for his shift. "Bring me the scan tool. Let's see what the diagnostics tell us." Jimmy Parker, barely 19 and eager to prove himself, wheeled over the shop's most expensive piece of diagnostic equipment. A computer that could interface with modern engine management systems and decode the cryptic language of sensor data and error codes. But as Jimmy attempted to connect the device to the Rolls-Royce, he discovered the first of many complications that would define this morning. Manuel," Jimmy said, holding up the diagnostic connector with a puzzled expression. "This doesn't fit anywhere on this car." "What do you mean it doesn't fit?" Manuel asked, momentarily forgetting that diagnostic ports were a relatively recent innovation in automotive history. The 1965 Rolls-Royce had been built in an era when diagnosis meant listening, feeling, and understanding rather than reading computer codes. Old Ralph materialized beside the car, as if he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. At 72, Ralph had been fixing cars since before electronic ignition was a gleam in an engineer's eye, and his weathered hands carried the accumulated wisdom of 5 decades spent coaxing life from mechanical systems. "Boys," Ralph said with the patient tone of someone explaining arithmetic to children, "this here's a 1965. Ain't no computer in this car to talk to your fancy machine. This is all mechanical. All timing chains and carburetors and points that need to be set by hand." Worthington's impatience was becoming more evident by the minute. He checked his watch, a gold Rolex that probably cost more than the diagnostic equipment, and cleared his throat meaningfully. "Gentlemen," he said, "I don't care how you diagnose it. I need this car running properly within the hour, or I'll be forced to have it towed to a facility that can actually handle luxury automobiles." The threat hung in the air like exhaust fumes. Everyone in the shop understood the implications. Losing a customer like Worthington wouldn't just mean lost revenue. It could damage their reputation in a small town where word traveled fast and forgiveness came slow. Robert continued his methodical cleaning, moving closer to the Rolls-Royce as his duties required him to mop the floor around the work area. As he worked, his trained ear caught nuances in the engine's operation that the others were missing. The hesitation wasn't random. It followed a pattern that suggested a very specific type of mechanical failure, one that he'd encountered exactly twice in his previous career, both times on British engines of this vintage. From his position near the car's front bumper, Robert could see into the engine bay at an angle that revealed details invisible to someone standing directly in front. The slight vibration in the throttle linkage, the way the spark plug wires trembled with each engine revolution, the subtle variation in exhaust smoke that puffed from the tailpipe. All of these symptoms painted a clear picture for someone with the knowledge to interpret them. But Robert said nothing. He simply continued mopping, invisible in his janitor's uniform, while the mechanics began their systematic investigation of a problem that was about to challenge everything they thought they knew about automotive repair. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The Rolls-Royce's engine continued its irregular rhythm as Manuel circled the vehicle like a predator, studying unfamiliar prey. He'd built his reputation on solving problems quickly, but this magnificent machine was revealing the limitations of his modern training. Every component under the hood was machined to tolerances that seemed almost impossibly precise, yet somewhere within this mechanical symphony, discord had crept in. "Ralph?" Manuel asked, stepping back from the engine bay with obvious frustration creasing his features. "You ever work on one of these before?" Old Ralph scratched his grizzled chin, his eyes distant as memory carried him back through decades of automotive encounters. The morning sun slanted through the shop's windows, highlighting every line in his weathered face as he considered the question. "Once, maybe twice," Ralph admitted, moving to stand beside Manuel. "But that was 30 years ago. And neither time did I have to fix anything this complicated. These British engines, they're built different. Everything's tighter, more precise. You can't just throw parts at them like you do with domestic cars." Worthington's patience was eroding with each passing minute. He paced near the shop's entrance, his expensive shoes clicking against the concrete in an increasingly agitated rhythm. The morning light caught the gold threads in his suit fabric, creating tiny sparkles that seemed out of place in the industrial setting of the repair shop. "Look," Worthington said, pulling out his phone to check the time again. "I appreciate that this might be outside your usual expertise, but I really do have somewhere important to be. If you can't handle this, just say so and I'll call for a tow truck." Lucia felt the weight of potential disaster settling on her shoulders. The shop's reputation depended on solving problems, not admitting defeat, especially not to someone who could influence other potential customers throughout the region. She'd inherited more than just tools and equipment from her father. She'd inherited the responsibility of maintaining his legacy of automotive excellence. "Give us a few more minutes, sir," Lucia said, forcing confidence into her voice. "Manuel's one of the best mechanics in Oklahoma. If anyone can figure this out, he can." Jimmy had been studying the Rolls-Royce's engine with the intensity of someone trying to decode a foreign language. His young eyes were sharp, and his mechanical training was fresh from technical school. But the handcrafted complexity before him defied the systematic approaches he'd been taught. "Manuel," Jimmy said, pointing to a series of vacuum lines that snaked through the engine bay like automotive arteries. "These connections aren't like anything in our manuals. And this carburetor setup, I've never seen multiple carburetors synchronized like this." Manuel followed Jimmy's pointing finger, his own confusion deepening as he recognized the truth in the apprentice's observation. The Rolls-Royce's engine management system was entirely mechanical, relying on precisely calibrated carburetors, vacuum-operated timing advances, and fuel metering systems that required decades of experience to understand properly. Robert continued his cleaning routine, methodically working his way around the shop while maintaining perfect awareness of the developing situation. As he emptied the waste basket near Manuel's workbench, he overheard a conversation that revealed just how serious the problem was becoming. "The timing sounds off," Manuel muttered to Jimmy, his voice low enough that Worthington couldn't hear. "But I can't figure out how to check it properly without the right equipment. This distributor system is completely different from what we're used to. Should we call Peterson's shop over in Oklahoma City? Jimmy suggested. They advertise classic car restoration and admit we can't handle it. Manuel's pride was clearly wounded. That would kill our reputation. Word gets around that Gutierrez Auto can't fix a simple engine problem, and we'll lose half our customers. Robert paused in his work, recognizing the desperation creeping into Manuel's voice. He'd seen this scenario before, though from the other side, as the expert being called in to solve problems that had stumped local mechanics. The irony wasn't lost on him that he now stood invisible in janitor's coveralls while watching good people struggle with a problem he could solve in minutes. The morning wore on with mounting tension. Manuel attempted several diagnostic approaches, each one revealing new layers of complexity that challenged his expertise. He checked spark plug gaps, tested fuel pressure with improvised equipment, and even attempted to synchronize the multiple carburetors using methods he'd read about but never actually performed. "The fuel mixture is all wrong," Manuel announced after 45 minutes of increasingly frantic work. "But I can't figure out how to adjust these carburetors properly. There are too many variables, too many adjustments that all interact with each other." Worthington's composure finally cracked. He strode across the shop floor with the purposeful gait of someone accustomed to cutting through obstacles with sheer force of will and financial leverage. "This is ridiculous," he declared, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had probably ended many discussions over the years. "I'm calling my insurance company to arrange for professional transport to a dealership that actually knows what they're doing." The words hit the shop like a physical blow. Lucia felt her father's legacy slipping away with each syllable, while Manuel's professional confidence crumbled under the weight of public failure. Even Jimmy looked defeated, his young enthusiasm dampened by the stark reality that some problems were simply beyond their current capabilities. Old Ralph stepped forward, his weathered hands raised in a gesture of conciliation that spoke of decades spent mediating between frustrated customers and overwhelmed mechanics. "Now hold on just a minute," Ralph said, his voice carrying the measured calm of someone who'd seen enough automotive crises to maintain perspective. "Nobody's calling this shop incompetent while I'm standing here. We've just got ourselves a learning situation, that's all." Worthington's eyebrows rose in disbelief. "I'm not paying for your education at the expense of my schedule." The confrontation was escalating toward the kind of scene that would be remembered and retold throughout Burfield for years to come. Local customers would hear about the morning when Gutierrez Auto couldn't handle a rich man's car, and the story would grow with each telling until it became legend. Robert made a decision that surprised even himself. He set down his mop and walked directly toward the group gathered around the Rolls-Royce, his work boots making soft sounds against the concrete floor. Every eye in the shop turned toward him with varying degrees of surprise and confusion. "Excuse me," Robert said quietly, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of authority that caused everyone to pause. "I couldn't help but overhear your discussion about the timing issue." Manuel turned toward Robert with the kind of expression reserved for someone who'd just seen their janitor speak fluent French. The surprise on his face was almost comical, as if the shop's furniture had suddenly begun offering mechanical advice. "Robert, what are you talking about?" Lucia asked, her own confusion evident in the way she tilted her head slightly, trying to reconcile the quiet man who emptied her trash cans with someone bold enough to interrupt a customer crisis. I think I might be able to help, Robert continued, his gaze moving systematically between the engine bay and the faces staring at him. I've worked on this exact engine configuration before. The statement hung in the air, like smoke from an expensive cigar, impossible to ignore, yet difficult to believe. Worthington studied Robert with the calculating gaze of someone reassessing a situation that had taken an unexpected turn. "You're the janitor," Worthington observed, his tone suggesting that this fact alone disqualified Robert from any mechanical opinions. "I am," Robert agreed without defensiveness. "But before that, I was other things." Old Ralph's eyes narrowed as he studied Robert with renewed interest. In 5 years of working together, Ralph had noticed things about their janitor that hadn't quite added up. The way Robert instinctively ducked under low-hanging exhaust pipes. How he could identify different engine problems just by listening to idle patterns. The careful precision with which he cleaned around delicate diagnostic equipment. "What kind of other things?" Ralph asked, his question carrying weight that demanded an honest answer. Robert hesitated for a moment, recognizing that his next words would change everything about his carefully maintained anonymity. He'd spent 5 years hiding from a professional past that had ended in disappointment and discrimination. But watching good people struggle with a problem he could easily solve was testing the limits of his self-imposed exile. "I used to design engines," Robert said simply, "including restoration specifications for classic British automotive systems." The revelation struck the group like lightning hitting a weather vane. Manuel's mouth opened slightly as he tried to process this information, while Jimmy's young face showed the kind of amazement reserved for discovering that your quiet neighbor was actually a famous person in disguise. Worthington's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious interest, his businessman's instincts recognizing the potential significance of this unexpected development. "Design engines?" Worthington repeated, his voice carefully neutral. "What kind of engines?" "The kind that require precision timing, synchronized carburation, and an understanding of how British engineering approaches differ from American mass production methods," Robert replied, his words carrying the quiet confidence of genuine expertise. Lucia looked between Robert and the Rolls-Royce, as if seeing both for the first time. The modest janitor who'd worked for her for 5 years was revealing depths she'd never suspected, while the impossible repair job suddenly seemed less impossible. "If you know about these engines," Manuel said slowly, his professional pride warring with practical necessity, "then maybe you could give us some guidance." Robert stepped closer to the engine bay, his movements taking on a different quality as years of suppressed expertise began to surface. He didn't touch anything yet, but his eyes moved systematically through the mechanical landscape before him, reading the engine's story in ways that escaped less experienced observers. "The problem isn't just timing," Robert said after a moment of careful study. "It's carburetor synchronization combined with a fuel mixture imbalance that's being complicated by a partially blocked vacuum advance mechanism. The symptoms you're hearing are all 3 problems interacting with each other." The specificity of his diagnosis silenced the shop. Even Worthington stepped closer, his business trained, mind recognizing the sound of real expertise. The silence that followed Robert's technical assessment stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Worthington studied the janitor with the penetrating gaze of someone who'd made his fortune by quickly separating genuine expertise from elaborate bluffs. The billionaire's fingers drummed against his thigh in a rhythm that matched his internal calculations. "You speak with considerable confidence for someone who cleans floors," Worthington said, his tone neither dismissive nor accepting, but carefully measured. "Tell me something specific about this engine that proves you're not just repeating things you've overheard." Robert moved closer to the engine bay, his weathered hands hovering inches above the complex mechanical landscape without actually touching anything. His eyes traced pathways through the maze of components with the practiced efficiency of someone reading a familiar book. "The vacuum advance diaphragm on your distributor has a partial tear," Robert said, pointing to a small cylindrical component nestled deep within the engine compartment. "You can hear it in the way the engine hesitates during acceleration. It's not getting proper timing advance under load. The carburetor synchronization is off because someone tried to compensate for the timing problem by richening the fuel mixture on the rear carburetor, which is why you're getting that slight black smoke from the exhaust when the engine revs." Manuel's eyes widened as he followed Robert's explanation, recognizing symptoms he'd noticed but hadn't been able to connect into a coherent diagnosis. The rear exhaust pipe had indeed been producing darker smoke, and the acceleration hesitation was exactly as Robert described. Jimmy pulled out his phone and began searching for images of vacuum advance mechanisms, his young face showing the concentration of someone trying to absorb new knowledge at maximum speed. The technical school had covered these components in theory, but seeing one in its original application was entirely different from studying simplified diagrams. "How could you possibly know about a torn diaphragm without taking anything apart?" Lucia asked, her voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. She'd watched 3 mechanics spend nearly 2 hours investigating this problem without reaching such specific conclusions. "Because I designed the testing procedures for diagnosing vacuum advance failures in British engines for the Society of Automotive Engineers," Robert replied matter-of-factly. "Back when these cars were still considered modern vehicles, I wrote the technical bulletins the dealerships used for troubleshooting." The weight of this revelation settled over the group like dust after an explosion. Old Ralph's weathered features showed a mixture of respect and amazement, while Manuel struggled to reconcile 5 years of casual workplace interaction with the growing evidence of Robert's extraordinary background. Worthington pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly, his manicured fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. After several minutes of searching, he looked up from the device with an expression that had shifted from skepticism toward something approaching respect. "There are exactly 3 technical papers published by the Society of Automotive Engineers regarding vacuum advanced diagnostics in British engines from 1960 to 1970, Worthington announced, reading from his phone screen. "All 3 were authored by someone named Robert Taylor." The shop fell silent, except for the irregular idle of the Rolls-Royce engine, which suddenly seemed to be providing a mechanical drum roll for the most dramatic revelation in Gutierrez Auto Repair's 40-year history. Robert's carefully maintained anonymity was crumbling like old paint under a heat gun. "That would be me," Robert acknowledged quietly, his voice carrying neither pride nor shame, just simple acknowledgement of fact. "Why," Lucia asked slowly, "is someone who wrote technical papers for the Society of Automotive Engineers working as a janitor in my shop?" The question hung in the air like exhaust fumes, heavy with implications that everyone present could sense, but nobody fully understood. Robert's expression flickered with something that might have been old pain, quickly suppressed, but not quite hidden. "That's a long story," Robert said, deflecting the question with the skill of someone who'd had 5 years to practice avoiding personal explanations. "Right now, you have a more immediate problem." Worthington stepped forward, his businessman's instincts recognizing an opportunity to cut through complications and reach practical solutions. The morning was advancing, and his schedule remained inflexible regardless of the dramatic revelations unfolding in this unlikely setting. "Mr. Taylor," Worthington said, using Robert's surname for the first time since entering the shop, "if you truly understand this engine, can you fix it?" Robert studied the Rolls-Royce with the careful attention of a surgeon planning a complex operation. His eyes moved systematically through the engine compartment, cataloging components, assessing accessibility, and calculating the steps required to address each identified problem. "The vacuum advance diaphragm needs replacement," Robert said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone comfortable with technical leadership. "The carburetor synchronization requires complete readjustment using proper gauges, and the fuel mixture needs to be reset to original specifications. It's not complicated work, but it requires specific knowledge and the right tools." "How long would it take?" Worthington pressed, checking his watch again with the habitual gesture of someone for whom time represented measurable money. "With proper equipment and no interruptions, maybe 45 minutes, Robert replied. "But that assumes you have the correct replacement parts and synchronization gauges, which most shops don't stock for vehicles this old." Manuel felt his professional world shifting beneath his feet, like sand in an earthquake. Here was their janitor casually discussing repair procedures that had left him completely baffled, speaking with the kind of technical authority that Manuel had spent years trying to develop. "We don't have those specialized tools," Manuel admitted, his voice carrying the weight of professional defeat. "Our equipment is designed for modern cars with electronic systems." Old Ralph scratched his chin thoughtfully, his memory reaching back through decades of accumulated automotive experience. Something was nagging at him, a half-remembered detail that might prove significant. "Actually," Ralph said slowly, "we might have more than you think. Lucia's father kept a lot of old equipment in the back storage room, stuff from when this shop worked on everything from Model Ts to muscle cars." Lucia's eyes lit up with sudden possibility. Her father had been a pack rat when it came to tools, keeping every gauge, every specialized wrench, every piece of diagnostic equipment he'd ever acquired during his 50-year career. She'd been meaning to catalog the storage room's contents for years, but had never found the time. "Robert, if we can find the right tools, could you actually fix this car?" Lucia asked, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and disbelief. Robert hesitated, recognizing that his answer would commit him to revealing abilities he'd kept hidden for 5 years. Once he demonstrated his true capabilities, there would be no returning to the comfortable anonymity of his janitor's role. "Yes," he said simply. Worthington's expression sharpened with the focused intensity of someone who just heard exactly what he needed to hear. His watch showed that time was running short, but the possibility of a solution had appeared from the most unlikely source imaginable. "What would it be worth to you?" Worthington asked suddenly, his voice carrying the calculated tone of someone preparing to make a business proposition to prove that you can solve this problem. The question electrified the shop's atmosphere. Everyone present recognized that something significant was being negotiated, though the exact terms remained unclear. Robert studied Worthington's face, reading the shrewd intelligence behind the billionaire's carefully neutral expression. "What exactly are you proposing?" Robert asked. "A wager," Worthington replied, his businessman's instinct sensing an opportunity to transform frustration into entertainment. "You claim you can fix my car in 45 minutes. I say that's impossible, given the equipment limitations of this shop." Lucia felt her heart rate accelerating as she recognized the dangerous territory this conversation was entering. Worthington was wealthy enough to treat substantial sums of money as entertainment, but for her shop, any significant wager could represent financial disaster. "What kind of wager?" she asked carefully. Worthington smiled with the practiced charm of someone who'd negotiated countless deals over the years. His proposal, when it came, would be both generous and ruthless, offering extraordinary reward while demanding complete commitment. "If Mr. Taylor can fix my car properly in 1 hour or less, I'll pay this shop $50,000 for the repair," Worthington announced. "But if he fails, he loses his job, and this shop acknowledges publicly that it cannot handle luxury automotive service." The terms hit the group like a physical blow. $50,000 would transform Gutierrez's auto repairs financial situation, allowing for equipment upgrades, facility improvements, and security that Lucia had only dreamed about. But failure would mean professional humiliation and the loss of the one employee who apparently possessed the expertise to attempt such a repair. Manuel's face showed the complex emotions of someone watching his own professional limitations being exposed, while simultaneously hoping for a miracle that could benefit everyone. Jimmy looked between the adults with the wide-eyed expression of someone witnessing negotiations that seemed more like movie scenes than real life. "That's not fair," Lucia protested. "Robert's job shouldn't be part of any wager. He's my employee, and his employment security isn't negotiable." "Actually," Robert said quietly, his voice cutting through the mounting tension, "it is." Everyone turned toward him with expressions ranging from surprise to alarm. Robert's calm acceptance of Worthington's harsh terms seemed to indicate either supreme confidence or complete resignation to circumstances beyond his control. "You can't be serious," Manuel said. "Robert, you got a job here as long as you want it. You don't need to risk anything to prove some rich guy wrong." Robert looked around the shop that had been his refuge for 5 years, taking in the familiar workbenches, the honest faces of people who'd treated him with dignity despite his humble position, and the woman who'd given him employment when nobody else would. "Sometimes," Robert said slowly, "a person reaches a point where hiding becomes harder than revealing. I accept your terms, Mr. Worthington." The commitment was made with the finality of a closing door. Worthington nodded with satisfaction, recognizing the kind of total commitment that separated serious negotiations from casual conversation. 1 hour, Worthington confirmed, checking his watch and noting the exact time. "Starting when you begin actual repair work." Robert walked toward the storage room with measured steps, knowing that the next hour would either restore his professional identity or confirm his permanent exile from the career that had once defined his entire sense of self-worth. The storage room behind Gutierrez's auto repair held 40 years of automotive history, stacked in dusty layers like geological strata. Robert pushed open the heavy wooden door, and the smell of old metal and forgotten lubricants washed over him like a familiar cologne. Fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing shelves lined with tools that represented the evolution of automotive repair from simple mechanical systems to today's computerized complexity. Lucia followed him into the cramped space, her eyes scanning equipment she'd never properly cataloged. Boxes of precision instruments sat beneath layers of dust and cobwebs, their contents as mysterious to her as archaeological artifacts. Her father had been meticulous about keeping tools, but less organized about labeling their purposes or locations. "What exactly are we looking for?" Lucia asked, watching Robert move through the crowded space with surprising familiarity, as if he'd been mentally mapping its contents during his 5 years of employment. "Carburetor synchronization gauges," Robert replied, lifting boxes and peering behind stacked equipment with systematic precision. "They'll be brass or chrome-plated, about the size of pocket watches with flexible tubes and adjustable needles. Your father would have used them for tuning multi-carburetor setups back when those were common." His hands moved with practiced efficiency, sorting through decades of accumulated tools with the confidence of someone who understood both what he was seeking and where such items were likely to be stored. Behind him. The sounds from the shop carried clearly. Manuel's nervous pacing, Jimmy's excited chatter, and Worthington's impatient sighs as precious minutes ticked away. "Here," Robert said suddenly, his voice carrying satisfaction as he lifted a worn leather case from beneath a pile of timing lights. "This is exactly what we need." The case opened to reveal a set of carburetor synchronization gauges that gleamed despite their age, their brass fittings polished smooth by decades of use. Each gauge was precisely calibrated with measurement scales that could detect the minute differences in airflow that determined whether multiple carburetors were working in perfect harmony. Lucia examined the gauges with wonder, recognizing the quality of their construction without understanding their specific function. They represented a level of craftsmanship that modern diagnostic equipment, for all its electronic sophistication, somehow couldn't match. "How did you know these were here?" she asked. "Because your father was a real mechanic," Robert replied, continuing his search through the storage room's treasures. "Real mechanics keep real tools, even after the world moves on to different methods." His words carried respect for Roberto Gutierrez's professional legacy, but also hints of his own story, the tale of someone who'd watched his industry change while maintaining reverence for traditional craftsmanship. As he searched, Robert's movements revealed the muscle memory of someone who'd spent countless hours selecting the proper tool for each specific task. "Found them," Robert announced, extracting a smaller case containing vacuum testing equipment. Vacuum gauges, pressure testers, and he paused, opening another compartment with obvious pleasure. A complete set of British standard threading tools for carburetor adjustments. The clock was ticking with relentless precision, each second bringing them closer to either triumph or disaster. Robert gathered the necessary equipment, his selections revealing deep understanding of the repair process ahead. Every tool had a specific purpose in the complex choreography of restoring the Rolls-Royce to proper operation. They emerged from the storage room to find the shop transformed into something resembling a medical operating theater. Old Ralph had cleared a large workspace around the Rolls-Royce, while Jimmy had organized every available work light to provide optimal visibility. Manuel stood nearby, his expression mixing, professional curiosity with personal anxiety about the outcome. Worthington checked his watch with the precision of someone accustomed to measuring success in minutes rather than hours. His expensive suit seemed increasingly out of place in the shop's working environment, but his attention remained focused with the intensity of someone who'd made his fortune by recognizing genuine expertise when he encountered it. 43 minutes remaining, Worthington announced, his voice carrying neither encouragement nor intimidation, just the neutral precision of someone stating facts. Robert laid out his tools with the methodical care of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Each instrument found its designated place in a pattern that spoke of decades spent organizing work for maximum efficiency. The synchronization gauges gleamed under the shop lights, their brass fittings catching reflections like small golden suns. "Jimmy," Robert said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone comfortable with technical leadership, "I need you to start the engine and maintain exactly 120 RPM while I attach these gauges." The young apprentice moved to the driver's seat with obvious nervousness, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the throttle. The Rolls-Royce's engine responded with its characteristic smoothness, though the underlying irregularity remained clearly audible to trained ears. Robert connected the synchronization gauges to the carburetor air intakes with practiced efficiency, his movements demonstrating the kind of mechanical confidence that comes only from extensive experience. Each gauge began displaying readings that told the story of the engine's current condition through precise numerical language. "Just as I suspected," Robert murmured, studying the gauge readings with professional satisfaction. "The rear carburetor is running 15% rich, while the front carburetor is nearly 20% lean. No wonder the engine feels rough during acceleration." Manuel watched the diagnostic process with fascination, recognizing techniques that his modern training had never covered. The electronic diagnostic equipment he'd learned to rely upon could identify problems in contemporary engines, but these mechanical methods revealed subtleties that computers couldn't interpret. "How can you tell all that?" "Just from those gauges," Jimmy asked from the driver's seat, his young voice carrying genuine curiosity. "Because these gauges measure exactly what the engine needs to run properly," Robert explained while making his first carburetor adjustment. "Modern engines use computer sensors to control fuel mixture, but older engines depend on mechanical precision. These gauges show us whether that precision exists." His hands moved with surgeon-like precision as he adjusted the carburetor settings, each turn of the adjustment screws calculated to bring the readings closer to optimal parameters. The work required not just knowledge, but physical skill, the ability to make minute adjustments while monitoring their effects in real time. Worthington moved closer, his businessman's instincts recognizing the difference between genuine expertise and elaborate performance. Robert's movements carried the unconscious confidence of someone who'd performed these procedures countless times, making complex adjustments appear deceptively simple. 35 minutes, Worthington announced, though his tone had shifted slightly, carrying less skepticism and more genuine interest in the unfolding technical drama. Robert completed the carburetor synchronization with methodical precision, then turned his attention to the vacuum advance mechanism